Saches Kiddushin Daf Chaf Tes. We begin with a Mishnah near the top, which lists 5 categories of mitzvahs and who is chayev to do each one. And then the Gemara will begin going through the sources of each one and how we know the halachas of who is chayev in each of them. It also brings some related agadata towards the end of the daf. So let's see the Mishnah. So the mitzvah said, the Mishnah begins, the first 2 categories are mitzvahs of a son to the father and the father to the son. Interestingly, the Gemara is not sure what the translation of each phrase is, but the Mishnah begins is any mitzvah that the son has on the father, the men are chayev to do it, the women are pater, they don't have to do it. Any mitzvah that the father has on the son, both the men and the women are chayev to do that. Now, the Gemara is going to explain which one is which, what these 2 categories mean. Next, it talks about mitzvah saseh shezman grama. That's any mitzvah which is a positive commandment, something to do, not something to resist, which is only relevant during certain times. So on that, men are chayav and women are pater. Any mitzvah saseh that is not dependent on any time, it exists irrespective of the time, both men and women are chayav to do them. And a 5th category is a mitzvah saseh, something which we should resist doing. That applies to men and to women, no matter whether it's dependent on time or not. Any saseh, even if it's man grama, women are chayav in. Now, the 3 exceptions to that, the 3 mitzvahs that women are not chayav in, is the isser to shave payas, isser to shave the beard, and the isser for a kohen to become tamei mace. So let's begin the Gemara, which defines what does it mean, the mitzvah of the son on the father. That was the first thing, which we said applies only to men and not to women. So the Gemara first says maybe it means a mitzvah that a son has to do for his father, like yiras av, kavod av. So the Gemara says it's not true to say that only the son has to do that and not the daughter. It applies to the daughter as well. Like we have a brisa that specifically says on the pasuk of ish imay v'aviv tiro, would have only said ish, I would have thought that it applies only to a man, meaning only to a son and not to the daughter. And therefore it says tiro plural, that it applies to multiple people, meaning the son and the daughter. So therefore it's not true to say that this type of mitzvah that the son has to do for the father applies only to a man. So Rabbi Yehuda therefore says it means the opposite. It means a mitzvah that the father has to do for the son. And that's an obligation only on the father, not on the mother. Now, the Gemara says, we learned this in a brisa. The brisa says that a father is chayev to do several things for his son. He has to give him a bris milah. He has to redeem him if he's a bachar from kahanim. He has to teach him Torah. He has to marry him off to a wife. He has to teach him a trade. And some say he also has to teach him how to swim. Rabbi Yehuda says anyone who doesn't teach his son a trade is teaching him to be a thief, a bandit. Gemara says, he's teaching him? He's not teaching him anything. Gemara says, as if he's teaching him to be a thief, because that's what he's going to end up doing without a legal means of earning his livelihood. Now the Gemara goes through the sources of each of these. So first of all, we said that a father is obligated to give his son a bris milah. So what is the source for that? So it says, Avram was commanded to give a bris milah to his son Yitzchak. Now, next halacha is if the father does not give him a bris, the Vezdin is chayav to give him the bris. Where do you see that? Because it says himol chem kol zachar is an obligation. It says everybody has an obligation to make sure that every zachar, every male, has the bris. Now, let's say the Bezdin also fails in its obligation, then he has to give himself a bris. And where do you see that? It says v'aral zachar shelo yamol es b'sar alaso v'nechasa ihi v'nechasa. So any person who has an aral who has not had a bris gets kares if he doesn't give a bris to himself. Now, how do you know that this is not an obligation on the mother to give a bris to her son? So it says, Kasher Tziva Oisai Elikim, that Hashem commanded Avram, only him, and not Sarah. And therefore it did not apply to Sarah, it applies only to the father. Now, says Gemara, but that only tells us then, in that one instance of Avraham and Yitzchak. How do you know that it applies for all generations? Anytime the Torah says tzav, it's to tell you to do something right away and for generations. That means it applies for all generations, because it says, how do you know that it's telling you to do it right away? It says, tzav Yeshua v'chaskeu v'amtzeyu. That is, he should be bisrizus, encourage him and support him. And then it should be right away and for all generations, because it says, Menayim shetziva Hashem v'holo l'daresechem. From the day of the tzav, the day of the tziva, the day of the commandment, from then and for all generations onward. Okay, that takes care of Bismillah. Next, the Gemara talks about the mitzvah of redeeming a firstborn son from the kohen, the pidyon. So Gemara says, what is the source that a father has to redeem his son? And that's a pasuk explicitly it says kol b'chor banecha tifteh. Next halacha is that if the father doesn't redeem him, he is obligated to redeem himself, and that's because it says padoi tifteh. There's an extra obligation if that's on him. Says Gemara, what's the source that the mother does not have to redeem her son? Because it says tifteh and it's read as tipodeh, which means you connect the tifteh and the tipodeh, the redemption of the parent to the redemption of the self. And the only person who has an obligation to redeem the child, the only parent that has an obligation is one that has an obligation on his self. So the mother, who didn't have any obligation to redeem herself, does not have any obligation to redeem her child as well. So the Gemara says, okay, but how do you know that a woman doesn't have any obligation to redeem herself? So the Gemara says, because it says tipodeh, it says tifteh, and it's read tipodeh, which is, again, we use a drasha, very similar. We say anyone that there's no obligation to redeem him or her, there's no obligation for him or her to redeem themselves. And the woman has no obligation for anyone to redeem her, and therefore she has no obligation to redeem herself. So Gemara says, okay, but how do we know that she has no obligation for anyone to redeem her? How do we know that her father doesn't have to redeem her? So Gemara says that's because it says kol b'char banecha tifteh, and it doesn't say b'nai secha. One is only obligated to redeem his son and not his daughter. So the drashas therefore add up as follows. The Torah says, redeem your son. That means you don't have to redeem your daughter. Since the girl doesn't have to be redeemed by her parent, she doesn't have to redeem herself, because it says tifteh tipodeh. And since she doesn't have to redeem herself, she doesn't have to redeem her son, again because of the link of tifteh tipodeh. Says the Gemara, let's learn some halachos here. What about the Pidyon Haben? What is the order of Kedima within Pidyon Haben? What takes priority? So the Gemara quotes a brisa that says, if one himself is not redeemed, now he has a son. Now he has to redeem both himself and his own son. Which one should he do first? So some machlokes. The Tanna Kama says he should do himself first, and then his son, because he's obligated in his own self first. Rabbi Yehuda says the opposite, because the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben is primarily on the father, and therefore the mitzvah of him to redeem himself is his father's mitzvah, not his. And the mitzvah to redeem his son is his mitzvah. Therefore, he should do his mitzvah first, which is to redeem his own son, before doing his father's mitzvah, which is to redeem himself. Now the Gemara narrows down this machlekes. The Gemara says, how much money does a person have that he has to choose one or the other? So says Rabbi Yirmiyah, if there's only 5 slama and only one redemption can happen, everybody agrees that he should do himself and not anyone else, because he has to take care of himself first. The mitzvah de gufe is always first. Something which is a mitzvah on his own body always comes first. The machlekes is where he has 5 slam free and available, and then he has 5 slam that are locked up, that there's a lien on them to someone else. So that is, he had sold land worth 5 slama, and he could theoretically take that away from the person who bought it. So Rabbi Yehuda holds that the mitzvah of Pidyon Haben is like it's written in a shtar. It's a rule we've seen before, we saw it on Daf Yud Gimel earlier, called milveh, called Ksuva b'Torah is kiksuva b'shtar dami. Anything which is written in the Torah is as if it's written in the shtar. So the obligation to pay the 5 slem to the kohen is written in the Torah. Therefore, it's as if it's written in a contract. And we know the rule that any obligation which is recorded in a contract, or for our purposes in the Torah itself, is you can take it away. You can collect as security even from land that the person owned that he sold. Now, which of the 2 obligations predates the sale of the land? Only the obligation to redeem himself. The obligation to redeem his own son may have come after the sale of the land. He may have had the son born after he sold the land already. Therefore, his own obligation, he can use the land that he sold to redeem himself. He could take those 5 slem away. And therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says he should redeem his son first with the 5 free slem that he has, then use the other 5 slem from the property that he had sold, take that away, because on that there is a shibud, and he can't take that away from the person who purchased it. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. The Rabbanan disagree. The Rabbanan say you can't take anything away from the one who's meshubed. You can't take anything away from the one who bought the land. They don't hold of the rule of milva d'ksuva b'iraisa k'ksuva b'shtar, and therefore they say you got to choose one or the other. There's only one set of 5 slime that's available, and mitzvah de gufa comes first, and therefore he should redeem himself and not his son. Okay, next halacha, the Gemara quotes a brisa that says if he has to choose between doing Pidyon Ben for his son or doing Alil Regel, so he should do Pidyon Ben first and then Alil Regel. According to the Tanna Kama, Rabbi Yehuda says Alil Regel first and then Pidyon Ben. Now, what's the reasoning? Well, Rabbi Yehuda says Alil Regel is going to pass. If you don't do it on time, you're going to miss it. Once Yom Tov has passed, you can't do it again. Pidyon Ben you can always do later. Now, Rabbanon, the Gemara, so Rabbi Yehuda had spelled out in the Brisa what his reason is. The Gemara wants to know what is the Rabbanon's reasoning. So the Gemara says the Rabbanon, look at the order of the pasuk. It says Kol B'char B'necha Tifte, and afterwards it says La Yiru Panei Reikam, come to do Aliyah L'Regel. So you see the obligation to redeem the son comes before Aliyah L'Regel. Okay, next the Gemara quotes another Brisa with some more halachas of Pidyon Ben. If somebody has 5 wives and they each have a son, he has to redeem all 5 of them, because it's the firstborn of the wife. So what's the source of that? It says, Kol b'char b'necha tifte, redeem all your firstborns. The Gemara asks if that's obvious. The Torah defines a firstborn as peterechem, who opens the womb, and therefore it's dependent on being the firstborn to the mother, not to the father. Someone says, you may have thought you should learn from b'char the halachos of inheritance, that the Bechar, the firstborn, gets twice the portion of the inheritance. That's only for a Bechar of the father. And that's because it says Reishis Oinai. So you may have thought you should link these two halachas of Bechar, and this also has to be a firstborn of the father. And in this case, it would be the father and the mother. And therefore, you need the Brisa to tell me otherwise. Okay, next Gemara moves back to the previous brisa that discussed the obligations of a father to his son. And one of the obligations is to teach him Torah. So what's the source for that? He'll have a very similar exchange to the one we had about Pidyon Ben. So the Gemara quotes the pasuk says, "V'limadatem leisam es benechem," and you have an obligation to teach it to your sons. Now, if he doesn't teach himself, if his father doesn't teach him, he has to teach himself. Hey, where do you see that? Because it says "V'limadatem," that you have to learn it. Now, how do you know that the mother does not have an obligation to teach her son? Because it says "V'limadatem," it's pronounced "V'limadatem," and it's spelled "Ulimadatem." That is, it should get done, and you should get it done. The one, as we said, refers to the mitzvah to teach one's son, and the other refers to the mitzvah to teach oneself. The two are connected. You only have a mitzvah to teach your son if you have a mitzvah to teach yourself. Now, how do you know that she doesn't have a mitzvah to learn herself, that you're saying therefore she doesn't have a mitzvah to teach her son? And again, because it links V'limadatem to Ulimadatem. The Kri and the Ksiv, anyone who there's no obligation to teach her, there's no obligation for her to learn herself. And again, then, how do you know that she's no obligation for her father to teach her? So the Gemara says, because it says, V'limadatem leisam es benechem v'lei benesechem. So again, the flow works that because it says benechem v'limadatem leisam es benechem, teach your sons, there's no obligation to teach the daughter. And since there's no obligation to teach the daughter, and we have a link between ulimadatem and ulimadatem, that if there's no obligation to teach the daughter, she doesn't have an obligation to teach herself. And by the same pasuk, if she doesn't have an obligation to teach herself, she doesn't have an obligation to teach her son. Okay, next brisa, we'll get into these halachos. What if he needs to teach himself and he needs to teach his son, and he can only afford a rebbe for one of them? Who comes first? So again, machlekes the Rabbanon and Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbanon hold he should teach himself first. The mitzvah shebegufi comes first. Rabbi Yehuda says usually that's true, but if he sees that his son is more motivated and more likely to be successful, he should have his son go first. The Gemara quotes a story that happened. The Gemara says, Rav Yaakov, breder of Acha, Bar Yaakov's father sent him to learn. That is, Rav Acha sent his son, Rav Yaakov, to learn. And when he came back, he saw that he wasn't very sharp, and he would be able to learn better himself. So he said, you come back, you stay here, I'm going to go learn instead of you. Now, the Rashi of the time was Abaye. When Abaye heard that Rav Acha was coming, he figured this is an opportunity to take care of a problem that we have. What's the problem? There was a mazik, there was a spirit of some sort that was in the Beis Medrash that was bothering the Rabbanan, and it was so powerful that even when two Rabbanan came together, and even if they came during the daytime, it was still harassing them, and they couldn't overpower it. So he figured, let's force Rav Acha to kind of spend the night in the Beis Medrash, and then he'll figure out how to deal with it. So he told everybody, nobody invite him to your house. The first night he's here, he'll end up having to sleep in the Beis Medrash, and that's what he did. He went to the Beis Medrash, and he encountered this mazik. The Gemara says it appeared to him as a 7-headed snake. When he saw that, he was mispalel to be saved from it, and each time he did a kriya, he bowed, one of the heads fell off. He bowed 7 times in his tefillah, and all 7 heads fell off. wasn't too pleased about it, and he said to them afterwards, if not for this miracle that happened to me, you would have caused me a grave, dangerous situation. Okay, now the Gemara discusses priorities between learning and marriage. So it's a brisa that says, which is preferable? Should one get married first, or should one spend time learning Torah first? So we have two opinions. The Tanna Kama says he should first learn and then get married. But it says, if it is impossible for him to exist without a wife, meaning he's struggling with nisyanos, then he should get married first to take care of that, and then he should go to learn. Says Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, the halacha is everyone should get married first and then go learn. Rabbi Yechanan said, how could you have this burden, what he calls the millstone on your neck of supporting a family, and then you're going to be able to learn? So he's therefore saying that you should learn first and then get married. Says the Gemara, it's not a machlekes. One is talking about here in Eretz Yisrael, and one is talking about in Chutz La'aretz. Rashi explains it depends if the custom was to leave home to go learn, or the custom was to learn near one's home and therefore be home every night. The ones that were to be home every night would not be able to learn if they were married, and therefore they should learn first and then get married. The ones who would travel to learn, they could go away to learn, they don't have to worry, and they can be married and it'll be fine. Now the Gemara speaks a little bit about the importance of marriage. So the Gemara says that Rav Chizda told Rav Huna, he praised Rav Hamnuna, said Rav Hamnuna is a great Adam Gadol. So Rav Huna said, when he comes to you, bring him to me, I would like to see him. When he came, he saw that he did not have his head covered by a talus in the manner in which married people used to. So he said, why don't you have the talus over your head? So he said, because I'm not married. So Rav Huna turned his face away and he said, make sure you don't look at my face until you get married. The Gemara says Rav Huna is in accordance with his teaching elsewhere, where he says somebody who reaches the age of 20 and he is not married, all his days are spent in sin. The Gemara says, in sin? Is he really for sure doing Averos? The Gemara says, no, he's maybe not doing Averos, but he's definitely struggling with thoughts of Avera. Says Rava, and we learn it in the Brisa of the Be'er Bishmal, until a person is 20 years old, the Kadosh Baruch Hu is waiting, when is he going to get married? And when he gets to 20 and he doesn't get married, Kaviyachal, Hashem gives up on him, and it says, let his bones swell. Says Rav Chizda, that I am more successful in learning than my Chaverim is because I got married at age 16. Had I gotten married at age 14, I would have said to the Satan, meaning the Yetzer Hara, arrows in your eyes, meaning I could start up with him and I could tempt myself and I would be able to defeat that challenge. Said Rava to Rav Nasan bar Ami, as long as you still have control over your son, teach him. And here Rashi brings two pshatim, either teach him to get married right away or just give him to Chachas Musar. The Gemara says, what age is that applied to? The Gemara says, Machlokes, if it's from age 16 to age 22 or from age 18 to age 24. The Gemara also says, it's like a Machlokes Tanaim, it says, Chanech l'nar al pi darkai, educate a child according to his way, meaning teach him when he is young so that he can develop his way and that'll set him for life. What is that age? Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nechemia, one says 16 to 22, and one says 18 to 24.